Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Welcome back to Teasers season for patch 0.5.0. Welcome to day 10. Today, we got the full details of the Spirit Walker Ascendancy. Grinding Games posted a video. We're going to break it down. We're going to go into much more detail than they do. We're going to talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of all of the different nodes that are present. On top of that, though, there's also going to be a whole bunch of other things to discuss because Grinding Games made two little mistakes in this video. One of which we know the correction to, the other one we don't know the correction to. So we're going to want to talk about those as well. Anyways, a lot to jump into, so why don't we just get onto it? Let's have a look at Grinding Games' video. And as always, I'm going to pause when there's something that needs elaboration on because there's going to be a lot of that.
Mountain-born hold the spirit dear. But I seek not just to hold it. I seek to become its champion, like the Asmiri of old. I seek to become a spirit walker.
Okay, so they certainly start with an impressive little lore introduction there. So far, we've got no real information beyond just a bit of a confirmation that the Asmiri are very tied thematically into the Spirit Walker Ascendancy. This is the most nature-aligned of the three different Huntress Ascendancies. You will see that theme is very strongly echoed through everything. This is very much a nature/beast themed Ascendancy, and you're going to want to play it if and only if you're interested in those things. Whilst some of the nature things do play into projectile skills, I don't think there's quite enough in here without actually wanting to have companions alongside your build, or using some of the other unique mechanics that are present here.
In Return of the Ancients, we're adding an Ascendancy class for the Huntress, the Spirit Walker. We covered some of this in our recent content review, but here we will dig deeper and even showcase some potential builds. Most of the Ascendancy class is devoted to three aspects of the Spirit: Vivid, Primal, and Wild. The Vivid path conjures stampeding stags when you attack.
Right, I think at this point I'm going to have to showcase all of those for a little bit longer. The Grinding Games video doesn't really showcase enough of the actual text of these effects, but you're going to want to have a look at every single one of these mechanics that's available. And let's go through them, starting with the things that have already disappeared off the screen. So there is a notable that is called Vivid Stampede. This grants a skill called Vivid Stampede, and you gain a Vivid Wisp for every 20 meters that you move, up to a maximum of 3. However, it is very important to note that at one point, this 20 meters, which is what's presented on the screenshots, is actually contradicted by Mark, who says 10. It is not clear at the moment whether it is 10 or 20. I believe it's probably 20 and Mark misspoke, but it may be the case that it is changed in internal testing. I feel that this is going to be quite weak if it is indeed 20 meters, because 20 meters is a long way. If you're walking at a standard endgame movement speed without extraordinary gear, that's basically 4 seconds of walking in order to use this skill once. That's a very, very long time. However, if you do expedite your movement through various movement skills, then potentially that can end up being better. Now, you're going to burn up all of the Vivid Wisps that you've accumulated in order to trigger Vivid Stampede when you attack. So it's important to note that you have to attack, and also that some traversal skills that have the attack tag, they're kind of going to cause you to set this off a bit earlier than you might have wanted to. So it's both something that you don't have complete agency over, but it is something that you do trigger, which has a lot of upsides to it as well. What is this Vivid Stampede? Well, why don't we have a look?
Vivid Stampede gives you extra damage, area coverage, and shocking capabilities. If you want to really focus on the stags, the Morrigan's guidance lets you create even more stampedes with even more damage.
So when I was editing this, I realized that I'd missed something really important here, and that is that you gain a Vivid Wisp when the Vivid Stampede ends with this. So the Morrigan's guidance is going to give you considerable more access to using these stags if you're interested in them. As well as that, they also do more damage. I'm still not sold on the stags as an overall package, but this does address some of the concerns that I had about just 20 meters being way too far to walk. So what this is going to mean in practice is you're going to cast Vivid Stampede when you've got 3 wisps. You're then going to consume all 3 of them. So you go down to 0. Then when the Vivid Stampede ends, you're going to have one of your wisps back. Maybe you've also got a second one from walking during that period, probably not, but that is going to help make this quite a bit better than my first reaction was. That said, I'm still not sold on this package, just it's got some potential with it.
Trampling your enemies into dust.
So there's a lot more to say on this, but ultimately the stags are the part of the Ascendancy I am probably the least sold on. And actually the primal section, which is what we're going to move on to next, is the part that I am the next least sold on. The reason I'm not that sold on the stags is that they don't have phenomenal screen coverage for something that has such a big setup. What this means is that they're just not going to feel all that great when you're trying to clear. However, when it comes to bosses, the amount of running that's necessary to make them fire off, sometimes that is actually going to be something you do naturally while you're fighting a boss, but sometimes it's not going to be. I'm just not convinced that there is a cohesive enough package here. Now, this becomes quite a bit better if when Mark speaks later and contradicts the wording, then if he's correct and it is actually 10 meters, then it starts to feel a little bit better. But even then, I'm not absolutely won over unless the damage is able to hit more times than I think it can. Right, so we've had one section that is about granting you a brand new skill to use. The next section is going to be about enhancing your existing skills. It is exclusively about enhancing projectile skills, so you want to keep that in mind when you're thinking about exactly what you want to build with here.
The primal path, meanwhile, is all about projectiles. The owl grants you boons in the form of their feathers, which can be spent to add extra projectiles to your next skill. If you'd rather unleash the occasional barrage, the Mucker's gift lets you store up and use multiple feathers at once. And if you're really keen, the owl feathers work on spells too.
So let's have a look at some of the numbers here, because unfortunately, I think this is one of those cases where the devil is in the details. Empowered skills fire 2 additional projectiles and have 68% increased projectile speed. No complaints here. This would be worth an Ascendancy notable if it was remotely reliable. In fact, one of the best Ascendancy notables in the game is the +1 projectile that you can get in the Deadeye, and this is obviously more than double that. However, the drawback on this is really substantial. And let's have a look at that drawback, shall we? Primal Bounty. Gain a Primal Owl Feather every 4 seconds up to a cap of 3. Expend an Owl Feather when you dodge to trigger Primal Bounty. Pay attention to that wording. Expend an Owl Feather when you dodge to trigger Primal Bounty. So, you're wanting to fire off your mega attack and get all this extra projectile speed, all these additional projectiles. You have to dodge. This becomes a combo attack for your ranged attack. The thing is that the times you want to dodge the most when you're playing a build that's interested in using projectile skills, it's usually not just before you fire off your attack. It's often just after. And that's one of the reasons I'm not really sold on this. I do think there's a bit of power here, and I do think this is something you will use in a certain circumstance. It's just that spending 2 Ascendancy points to go into this, or even 4, if you want to go all the way up to the Mahaka section, is going to feel really painful. Now, if you do go all the way up into the Mahaka, then every 8 seconds you're going to gain 3 of your charges. And on top of that, you're going to be able to spend all 3 of them at once. And that is going to give you a pretty big Primal Bounty. My reading of this wording is that you're going to get 6 additional projectiles and 204% increased projectile speed. There are some skills that would really benefit from this, Cough Cough Spark, but unfortunately, those are the things that the rest of the Ascendancy doesn't really synergize with, and as a result, I don't think it's something you're really going to want to do. The key issue here in my mind is that Primal Bounty empowered skills are not spammable. What you would want to use this with is a Frenzy Charge empowered Lightning Spear that you've also empowered up through Vault, Support, and potentially a bunch of other things. This is another way that you can add into that combo playstyle that it comes up a bit with some of the Huntress builds. You can focus harder on that combo playstyle and you will get a payoff here, but whether this is superior to some of your other options, I'm not sold on that. But hey, why don't we talk about the Wild Protector? This side of things looks really intriguing.
For those who prefer their animal companions to be more literal, summon a Wild Protector to give your enemies a bear hug they won't soon forget. The bear is a powerful companion in its own right, and can also provide significant utility. Breaking enemy armor, maiming enemies, violent intimidating roars, and keeping itself fit to fight with its large health pool and life leech. Best of all, the bear doesn't even take up your companion slot, so you can keep your tame beast alongside you too. The Catha's balance skill can take your companion's damage one step further by giving them extra damage based on your weapon.
I want to come back to Catha's balance later, but there is so much to talk about with the Primal Companion. Firstly, there are 3 numbers you need to know: 40, 65, 90. These are the character experience levels at which there is a massive, 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 massive boost in the power level of the companion that you get here. The reason for that is where you get the effect of a lesser, a greater, and a perfect jewel absorb, respectively. Now that actually applies to all of these other skills that you're getting as part of your ascendancy as well, but I think it's just far more important on this one than it is on all of the rest. So keep those numbers in mind. On top of that, this skill is going to level up as you progress. So it is going to get big boosts at character levels 78, 84, and 90, which again are the spots where you gain access to level 18, 19, and 20 skill gems, respectively. You will immediately have these skills upgraded at that point. That's something you really need to keep in mind. This is going to be one of those sections of your passive tree where a lot of the power ends up being something that you build up over time. Now, the Intimidating Cry here is better than it looks, but it has a 15-second cooldown. Now, that means that sometimes it's not going to be available when you most want it on bosses. But Intimidating Cry is actually, it's a fairly substantial debuff that it applies to enemies. They deal 10% reduced damage and they take 10% increased damage. Now, this additively stacks with shock. So this can be somewhat of a defensive effect as well as an offensive one. There's really quite a lot to get behind when it comes to this, and there is a way that you can upgrade this even further, and that's going to come up when we start talking about the sacred options. So far we've been dealing with the 3 options where you've got either primal, vivid, or wild, but there is the 4th option, which is to be equal at all 3 of them and then unlock a new notable. However, I did promise we wanted to talk about Catha's balance. So this is bad on its own. However, I do believe that there will be ways to make this work really, really well. Today, we are going to take a look into some of the weapons that have ridiculous main hand weapon damage, but that require quite a bit of setup if you want to make them work. Firstly, keep in mind that you're not going to be using this in conjunction with a scepter and a shield or a scepter and a focus. You need to have something else. And there's a few weapons that you could consider. So you could take a rare one-handed weapon, and that's your first option. There's nothing wrong with that option, but why don't we go for something a little bit different? Why don't we take a look at Marohi Erqi? Marohi Erqi is a totemic great club. This has an oppressively high strength requirement, 239. That is going to be quite the challenge, especially when we get to the next thing and we push it over 700. However, it has extremely, extremely high local damage. You'll notice here that this single copy of Marohi Erqi does not have quality on it. And even then, it's 601 to 809 physical damage. And whilst this is an above average roll, it's not a massively above average roll. Now, this weapon has a bunch of really, really nasty drawbacks on it. Negative accuracy. Do we care about that? No, we don't. Negative attack speed. Do we care about that? No, we don't. And then there's all this stun affected things that don't really apply to us. This is one thing you could potentially use here. However, what if we were to want to use a scepter as well? Well, that's where Giant's Blood comes in. Giant's Blood is a keystone that reads you can wield 2-handed maces in one hand as with additional text, but it triples the attribute requirements. So we have pushed our Marohi Erqi from a 239 to an over 700 strength requirement. That's a little bit of a problem. We've got to solve that, but I'm confident we can do it. So this is going to allow you to use a 2-handed weapon and also to use an off-handed scepter. Now, what can we do with this? Well, we're going to at this point want to use something that lets us bypass that ridiculous attribute requirement we've just added onto the weapon. It's over 700 at the moment. So why don't we use a bricked vertex? One of the mods that can spawn on the unique helmet, the Vertex, is equipment has no attribute requirements. Now, normally what people will do is they actually try and corrupt this off the item. So there is an equipment has no attribute requirements version. There is also a gems have no attribute requirement version. You need explicitly an equipment version of it, and then you need the corruption to fail. Or alternately, you can just not corrupt it at all, but given how good the Vertex can be when it corrupts well, that's probably not what you're going to want to do. So, equipment has no attribute requirements. In conjunction with the text on this is triple attribute requirements of martial weapons. So, tripled and no requirements, that's 0. Marohi Erqi, all of these hideous requirements on it, they all seem to disappear. Fair warning, haven't tested this in game, so I'm not 100% certain that this works as I'm thinking about it. This is just my brainstorming mind going and thinking about things you might want to do here. Now, maybe you don't like having massive donk stick here. Maybe you want to use something that's a different donk stick that doesn't hit quite as hard, but that has some other benefits for your character. Maybe you could consider the Hammer of Faith in the same role. So essentially you'd use the same setup. It's a bit less essential to use the Vertex here, but 342 strength is still a pretty oppressive amount, so you probably do want to use it. And then you're going to end up with a different set of bonuses here. You're going to have some resistances, mana regenerate, and also you're going to have 2 cycling non-damaging shrines on your character as well. So a whole bunch of things that you can do here in order to play around with this. This is where we're trying to get a bit silly with the Catha's balance. The other thing though that's really important to keep in mind with the Catha's balance, you absolutely positively must. There is no alternative here. You must, with the Catha's balance, set up so that you are using fast attacking companions, because this is the sort of thing where you're adding a bunch of additional attack damage. If it's a slow methodical attack, you're adding a modest amount of damage onto a slow methodical attack. You're only getting this benefit every now and again. But if your companions are hitting really fast, then instead you're going to be getting this additional big chunk of added damage really quickly. So what do I think of this overall? I think the Catha's balance is mostly going to be a meme, but it's a really cool meme. There's one of those things that's definitely worth playing around with and just seeing what you can pull off with it. Right, so that is all of the skills that you can take individually in the sections that are Wisp aligned. However, there is something special that comes up when you invest heavily into this area. There is a secret Ascendancy notable, one that doesn't appear by default, but it's not super secret, so Grinding Games do tell you about it. This is what you get when you invest in all 3 types of Wisps. This is not going to fit every build, and it's more powerful on some setups and less powerful on others, but there's some good stuff here, so let's discuss.
Spirit Walkers who master all 3 aspects of the Spirit may attract the favour of the elusive Sacred Wisps. The Sacred Unity passive is free. It provides enhancements to all 3 skills. The Stags seek out enemies and can turn mid-stampede. Our feather-empowered skills create a new type of ground effect. And the Bear protects allies near it. Taking this node also causes all 3 skills to change appearance to reflect their sacred empowerment.
I think the first thing to say on this is just how thematically cool it is that the appearance of the skills changes. This is one of those things Grinding Games didn't need to do, but it just shows that they were really keen on having a cohesive, lore-oriented package for the Spirit Walker. Ultimately, this is an ascendancy that couldn't exist in a different game, and that's something that they really want to convey by adding in more things that play into the very specific fantasy of this character. But going into the mechanics of it a bit more. Firstly, I think the Bear gets the most here. 2% life regen and 8% damage transference is actually a fairly solid defense. So this is not something that is necessarily worth an Ascendancy notable on its own, but it's not something you have to spend an Ascendancy notable on. If you're in a position where you get at least some benefit out of everything here, then this is going to be a really meaningful bonus. I think it's easy to underestimate just how significant 8% damage transference is, because it is a big boost to the amount of damage it takes to kill your character. Secondly, we have the Soaring Ground effect. Soaring Ground will live or die based on one line that's very easy to miss, and that is that the effects of Soaring Ground linger for a second after you leave it. A second is quite a while, and this means that even just crossing over this Soaring Ground is going to feel quite impactful. You would only want to use this in conjunction with a skill that chains or forks or just has some sort of projectile mechanics that means that it's going to dance around the screen quite a bit. You definitely don't want to use this on something that just pierces and then disappears. But if you do use it on an appropriately chosen skill, then it's going to be there for you. The first thing it's going to provide you is 30% increased evasion rating. Secondly, 40% increased damage, but that is conditional upon you being on full life. I do think there's quite a bit of synergy between these two mods. So damage on full life and evasion rating work well together. The higher your evasion rating is, the easier it is for you to stay on full life. Then after that, you get Onslaught, which is better than the other stats. Onslaught is 20% increased attack speed, 20% increased cast speed, 10% increased movement speed. Note that those numbers are slightly different to Path of Exile 1. If you play both games, it is 20% movement speed in Path of Exile 1, but it is different here. Basically, Soaring Ground makes you a bit better at everything while not making you miraculously better at anything. It's a solid bonus. Again, not something that's so strong that you would necessarily want to spend an entire Ascendancy Notable on it, but you don't need to spend an entire Ascendancy Notable on it as long as you're getting at least something out of all of the Ascendancy Notables you need to allocate in order to unlock it. One more thing is that the ground effect lingers for 6 seconds as well. 6 seconds is an eternity in Path of Exile 2, and that means that you might just be able to replace it and maintain near full uptime on it against difficult bosses. Finally, we have the other option, which is the Stags. The Stags gain the ability to turn. I am not sold on the Stags, but I'm also not convinced they're bad. What I need to know about them is how much damage they can do to a single target. And there's nothing that really indicates that in any of the gameplay footage that's shown here. So I'm just going to remain unconvinced, but also interested in finding out more. Finally, there are going to be 2 other notables that are not quite so tied into this Asmiri and Wisp theme. They're instead going to have their own themes, one of which is around bosses, one of which is around socketing idols. Now, one thing that's very important to note here is that one of the idols that they showcase here is something that is new.
The Spirit Walker has a couple of tricks up her sleeve outside of animal spirits. Idolatry provides massive bonuses to more minion-focused builds. And last, but definitely not least, the Natural Order passive grants Tame Beast the ability to tame bosses.
Right, so when it comes to Idolatry, there are some things we need to talk about with this Ascendancy Notable because this has some very real power to it. It provides a lot of increased damage to companions, but at the same time, it also has a very toxic drawback. And that toxic drawback is one that I don't think it really needed. So, minus 4% to all elemental resistances per non-idle augment in your equipment. This is really bad because one of the things that you will want to do early in progression is address holes in both your character's resistances and also in your character's attributes through the use of very common, very cheap runes. And this is just basically turning that ability off. It's not something that affects players that are solidly at endgame and that are in really good gear, but it's something that's going to mean you do not want to have Idolatry early at all. However, the benefit that you get from this, companions dealing 10% increased damage per idol in your equipment, 2% reservation efficiency of skills per idol in your equipment. This is pretty substantial because you can definitely get 10 or more idols in your equipment. Very important to note that the Fox Idol that is teased here does different things to the Fox Idol that currently exists inside Path of Exile 2. And that's something that may be an intended change, or it may just be a playtest change that they were working on. So that is different to what the Fox Idol currently does. And who knows what else has changed when it comes to idols. However, one thing we need to talk about here, we've talked about the good, we've talked about the bad with this. Let's talk about the ugly. As of 0.4.0, and I don't know if this is still going to be the case in 0.50, if you allocate Idolatry, your gloves have no real useful socketed options at all. The thing is that with your sockets, they're all going to be things that boost your character rather than boosting your minions. And I'm assuming that you're going with Idolatry because you're interested in playing a minion build, and this is going to work completely at cross purposes with what you're trying to do. You're basically in this awkward spot where you would like to put things in your gloves that fix your character up. Maybe they provide you with some chaos resistance you can't get anywhere else. Maybe they're providing you with some attributes. Maybe they're providing you with fire resistance you need. But then suddenly you hit with this 4% to all elemental resistance penalty per non-idle augment that's in your equipment. So I find like that is just an unneeded drawback on this notable. It's not necessarily an overwhelming drawback. It's certainly not a drawback at all once you're about level 93 or so and you've got quite good gear. But it's one of those things that means that if you take this at all, it's kind of got to be your 4th Ascendancy notable, which is a pity because you might want to have it coming online a little bit earlier. Oh, and did I mention that you're going to be able to tame bosses? You're going to be able to have bosses as minions in patch 0.5.0. And there is one question that I really want to know the answer to here, and that is, what happens with these bosses, which tend to generally be quite large, when they try to pass through a doorway? Can they make it at all? Do they dissolve into a wisp and then respawn on the other side? Or do they just get stuck until the next time they teleport to you? If that's the case, I think this is a dead on arrival notable. If it's the case there is some sort of solution that's made, maybe they wispify and go through the door and then unwispify, maybe they teleport to you more frequently, then in that case, maybe this notable has a chance. The other thing I also want to point out with this is that monsters tend to attack really slowly in Path of Exile 1 and 2. And here I'm talking not just bosses that are notoriously slow, but even bosses that are tiger-based. They end up having attacks that are quite slow as well. So you're going to find a limitation with using bosses as combat minions. Unless you can tremendously increase their attack speed, possibly beyond the limits of what's possible in the game at the moment, I think you're going to find that too often they're going to line up a really powerful attack that will one-shot the blue monster, but before they do one-shot the blue monster, 6 of your other minions fire a projectile at it, and they kill that blue monster. And then your boss minion brings down a massive pillar, slamming the ground, and it only hits the ground because there's only a corpse there of that blue monster. It's already been slain by all of your other minions because your minions don't communicate very well. So I'm a bit apprehensive about this notable. I do think it's going to be cool. I really, really want the ability for bosses to deal with terrain intelligently and effectively. If they have that, then it might have some potential. In any case, it's going to be cool. There's going to be some really weird things that people manage to do where they set up to have a boss dueling itself, and it's just going to look really funny to watch. But whether this is strong or not, I'm not sold on it. Also, though, with the Akbor shark, I just know someone's going to make a baby shark build, and it's probably going to be terrible, but it is also just going to be humorous to watch.
It probably won't come as a surprise to hear that these bosses can cut through packs and bring the pain to their former friends. If you like the look of the Spirit Walker, but need some further inspiration for what to do with her, we've put together a couple of in-game builds to give you ideas.
And actually, that does not alleviate any of my concerns about these monsters being able to fight effectively for us, because you can see there is a long delay between that boss initiating attacks and damage being registered upon the monster. Long delays are death in this game. Long delays are extremely, extremely dangerous, and you are not going to end up being in a good position when you're generally clearing with this. You might be effective against bosses, but I don't see it for clearing. But please prove me wrong on this. I hope to be wrong.
If you like the look of the Spirit Walker, but need some further inspiration for what to do with her, we've put together a couple of in-game builds to give you ideas, kindly made by some of our developers. First up, we have the Stormbringer. We have a standard-looking Twister build dialed to 11, where we utilize Whirling Slash and Barrage to unleash Twisters to devastate our enemies. We will use a combination of Barrage and our new notable Primal Bounty to create so many Twisters it more resembles a full Cyclone. Allocating Wild Protector, Primal Bounty, and Vivid Stampede will unlock a notable that empowers all three, giving them more utilities and features. Thanks to Primal Bounty and the Mucker's Gift, we generate a Primal Owl Feather every few seconds that will be used when we dodge roll to empower our next projectile attack, firing more Twisters and increasing their speed.
Right, so there's a lot going on here, but this is the way that I would have built around the combination of the three of them. The Twisters are definitely going to fire off in big numbers, but you need to remember that you are quite limited here in how frequently you can use that big attack. I think in many ways this is going to play like a Path of Exile 1 slam build does, but imagine what a Path of Exile 1 slam build would be like if you were reliant upon ancestral boosting as well, and you were reliant upon doing a dodge roll, or I guess in Path of Exile 1 that's a Quicksilver Flask, immediately beforehand as part of your combo. That, I think, is going to be the real difficulty here. You need to throw your dodge rolls in sometime in before you attack in order to make this effective. That's my concern with this setup. I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying that a lot of people are going to find that this is a clunky play style. And honestly, you know your own tolerance. If you're watching this video, you know your own tolerance for clunky play styles, for pressing many, many buttons. If your approach is that you don't have fun playing those builds, then please avoid this setup. Alternately, if you're the sort of person that likes the high skill expression you can get from it, then you might find that this is a quite interesting setup. That decision is going to be very personal. It's going to be up to you. I think it could be fun, but I'm also not going to do it as a build guide because I know there'll be a lot of people disappointed with it if I do.
But now, we want to start to empower our Wind Ruckus with the elements, gaining significantly more damage. To do that, we take Vivid Stampede, which grants us a Vivid Wisp every 10 meters we travel, which we can do faster by following our Soaring ground. And then, we expend those Wisps to unleash a stampede of Stag Spirits. Not only do they help kill enemies, they also create shock ground. There you have it. All that combined, we have our Stormbreaker.
Can't argue with that damage there, and this is still the same build, but I'm also just not aware what the gear level is. So if this is done on mirror tier gear, then that was pretty derisory performance. If this was done on reasonably bad gear, then that was extraordinarily good performance. And ultimately, I think we just really need to see how those stags perform in game. I do not have very high hopes for them, but again, it's something that I hope to be proven wrong on. After that, Granny Gear Games put together one other build that's worth having a look at as well.
And for our second build today, we have the Zookeeper. This build is for those who prefer to sit back and let your animal army do all the work. The Spirit Walker has enlisted the entire zoo to fight on her behalf, with a whopping 6 companion skills active. This is thanks to Sylvan's Effigy, a new unique scepter coming in Return of the Ancients that completely removes the companion cap, and also gives us a big bad alpha wolf that buffs all our other companions. We've also got a pack of regular wolves, 3 different tame beasts, including the mighty Silverfist, and our trusty bear, with our last bits of spirit used on some skeletal clerics to keep everyone healthy. All you have to do is sit back and enjoy the show, and maybe remind your alpha wolf to summon its spirit friends every once in a while. This might be a good time to mention that companion damage has been buffed across the board. This build squeezes maximum value out of Spirit Walker's Idolatry node, even wearing Darkness Enthroned to equip more idols. Finally, we're going all the way to the Catha's Balance and wielding a juicy spear to grant our companions a lot of damage. So, are you ready to embrace the full power of the Spirit? You can do just that on May 29th.
So a couple of things to point out here. Firstly, that spear is not what I would term very juicy. It is a serviceable early endgame spear, but whilst the individual modifiers on it are sometimes powerful, they have dyssynergy with each other. You could craft better than that with a lot of crafting methods. So that spear is actually quite bad. I have no idea how rare that scepter is. It does something really unique and really interesting. So it's definitely going to be from the Pinnacle boss, and it could be quite hard to get, or it could be one of the common drops. We never know on things like that. As for this build's performance, I think there's some interesting things going on with it, but the time to kill is pretty long. And I also don't think people should expect the Zookeeper playstyle to be quite as sit back as Mark is talking about there. You are definitely going to want to be actively cursing monsters or marking monsters. You are definitely going to want to be taking a little bit of an interest like that in order to keep your minions effective and keep them doing as much damage as possible. That said, it is one of the more chill play styles, so if you're looking for something chill, then that's definitely something that you could look into. Also, on top of that, you're going to get the defensive bonuses of your bear intimidating sometimes. That's not going to be a permanent uptime because that bear's intimidating cry, I believe, to be on a 15-second cooldown, but it is still something. Oh, and did they mention that there was a new scepter in there? Maybe I should put that on screen now so that you can have another look at it. This scepter looks really interesting. It's definitely going to be something to play around with. It is extraordinarily build defining in a way that not many uniques are. There's this scepter, and there's also the shield, the Tull shield that we talked about recently. These are amongst some of the most build-defining unique items that we've seen recently. These are things that totally transform what you care about in terms of the way your build is going. I really like these sorts of uniques. They're not something that should be every single unique in the game, but I'm glad they exist, and a bunch of them are coming from Pinnacle bosses. So ultimately, today's news has been an eventful one. We got a deep dive into the Spirit Walker Ascendancy. There's a lot of cool stuff there. I am not sold on any given packages yet, but I'm also going into things open-minded. I just want to keep a warning out to you, though, that if you're the sort of person that doesn't like combo skill gameplay, then don't try and build around those owl setups. Those owl setups are going to feel very combo-ish because of the necessity to expend your dodge roll preemptively, i.e. before you might want it defensively, in order to make your next skill better. That's going to feel clunky, that's going to feel awkward, but the payoffs are there, and some of you, myself included, definitely find the combo gameplay style fun as well. I want to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.